Have you ever wondered if everything you were taught about Jesus has been missing his most profound message? What if the revolutionary spiritual teacher Joel Goldsmith uncovered a truth so transformative that it completely reshapes your relationship with the divine? Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to discover might forever change how you understand Jesus' teachings and your own spiritual potential. For centuries, religious institutions have positioned Jesus as someone to worship, someone separate from us, a divine being we must petition for help. But Goldsmith discovered something radically different in Jesus' original teachings. He found that Jesus never intended to be worshipped at all. Instead, Jesus came as a way shower, demonstrating what you are capable of becoming when you recognize the divine nature already within you. Has this ever happened to you? You pray fervently for healing, for abundance, for peace, and nothing seems to change. According to Goldsmith, this happens because we've been taught to approach prayer all wrong. We've been conditioned to beg an external deity for intervention when Jesus himself explicitly stated, "The kingdom of heaven is within you, not within him alone, within you." But before we continue exploring this profound spiritual revelation, please hit the like button and let me know where in the world you're watching from today. It's always fascinating seeing who's joining us from around the world. And if you haven't already, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any of our future videos. This fundamental shift in understanding changes everything about your spiritual journey. When Jesus performed miraculous healings, he wasn't showing off supernatural powers that only he possessed. He was demonstrating spiritual laws that you can access right now, in this moment. Every miracle was an invitation to recognize what's possible when you awaken to the Christ consciousness that is your true identity. Traditional Christianity has taught separation. You're the sinner, Jesus is the Savior. God is unreachable except through approved channels. But Goldsmith revealed that this creates a consciousness of lack that actually blocks spiritual demonstration. You can't manifest abundance while believing you're unworthy of divine grace. You can't access healing power while believing you're separate from it. What Jesus actually taught was mystical union, not someday in heaven, but right now, in this very moment. The Christ consciousness isn't something Jesus possessed exclusively 2,000 years ago. It's the eternal truth of being that exists in you this very second. Goldsmith called it recognizing your divine sonship, not earning it through good behavior or correct belief, but simply recognizing what's already true. Now, imagine what would happen if you stopped praying to Jesus and started praying from the Christ consciousness within you. The difference is everything. If you're resonating with these spiritual insights about Christ consciousness, hit subscribe and join our community of seekers uncovering the deeper truths that Jesus actually taught. The difference is everything. When you pray from Christ consciousness rather than to a personal Jesus, you're no longer operating from a place of lack or separation. You're acknowledging the profound truth that the same divine presence that worked through Jesus works through you right now. This hidden truth reveals something revolutionary about every miracle Jesus performed. Each healing, each manifestation of abundance, each moment of profound peace wasn't showing off supernatural powers that only he possessed. Goldsmith realized these were demonstrations of spiritual laws that are accessible to everyone. The blind man who received sight, the lepers who were cleansed, the stormy sea that became calm. These weren't exceptions to natural law, but expressions of spiritual principles that operate consistently when we align with them. Think about the mindset transformation this creates in your spiritual journey. Instead of seeing Jesus' miracles as historical events to marvel at, you can recognize them as practical instructions for your own spiritual awakening. He wasn't saying, "Look what I can do because I'm special." He was saying, Look what is possible when you recognize the truth of your being. Traditional Christianity has created a framework of separation that actually blocks spiritual demonstration. You're positioned as the sinner, Jesus as the Savior, and God as unreachable except through approved channels. This creates a consciousness of lack that makes it impossible to experience the very union Jesus came to reveal. It's like standing in front of an open door, but never walking through it because you've been told only special people are allowed to enter. Now, I want to go even deeper into this revelation Goldsmit discovered. The impact of this understanding completely reshapes your relationship with prayer itself. When you believe you're separate from God, prayer becomes begging. You plead for intervention, for mercy, for grace. But when you recognize mystical union, not as some future heavenly state but as present reality, prayer becomes recognition. You don't ask for what you already have. You acknowledge what is eternally true despite appearances. This isn't about positive thinking or visualization techniques. It's about a fundamental shift in your awareness of reality. The Christ isn't a person who lived 2,000 years ago. Christ is a state of consciousness that Jesus fully embodied, showing you what you're capable of when you recognize your true nature. When he said, "Before Abraham was, I am," he wasn't speaking of his human personality, but of the eternal Christ consciousness that has no beginning and no end. Every spiritual journey involves moments of profound decision. Will you continue relating to Jesus as someone separate from you, or will you dare to follow his actual instruction to recognize the kingdom of heaven is within you? The transformation happens when you stop looking at Jesus and start looking from where Jesus looked. If this perspective on Christ consciousness is beginning to resonate with your own spiritual intuition, write in the comments, "I recognize the Christ within." Now let's explore what this means for how we approach the challenges of everyday life. Let's explore what this means for how we approach the challenges of everyday life. One of the most profound revelations in Goldsmith's understanding is what he called recognizing your divine sonship. This isn't about gender, but about your relationship to the divine, not as something you earn through good behavior or correct belief, but as something that's already true about you right now. Think about how dramatically this shifts your spiritual mindset. Most of us have been conditioned to see ourselves as somehow separate from the divine, working to become worthy of connection through prayer, meditation, good deeds, or correct beliefs. But what if that entire framework is backward? What if, as Goldsmit discovered, your divine nature isn't something to achieve, but something to recognize? This insight creates a revolutionary shift in how you approach prayer itself. The reason your prayers often haven't worked as you hoped is because you've been praying from a consciousness of need, asking an external God to change your external circumstances. You've been operating from the hidden belief that you're separate from the source of good, that healing and abundance are somewhere out there and must be begged for. True prayer, as Goldsmit revealed, isn't petition at all. It's recognition of what already exists in spiritual reality. You don't beg for healing. You realize there's nothing in spirit that needs healing. The body merely reflects the consciousness you hold. When you shift from asking to acknowledging, from pleading to recognizing, the entire dynamic of your spiritual practice transforms. Behind the scenes of this journey is a profound but simple truth. Consciousness is cause. Whatever consciousness you hold becomes your experience. If you hold a consciousness of separation, lack, and unworthiness, that becomes your reality. But when you recognize your divine sonship, your inherent oneness with the source of all good, your external world begins to reflect that inner awareness. This isn't metaphysical theory, it's practical, spiritual mechanics. Margaret, one of Goldsmith's students, discovered this when facing terminal illness. Instead of continuing to beg God for healing, she practiced recognizing her spiritual wholeness. Within months, her doctors found no trace of the disease they'd declared incurable. She didn't get healed. She recognized she had never been separate from wholeness. The impact of this understanding reaches into every area of life: relationships, finances, purpose, peace. Whatever challenge you're facing right now isn't asking you to pray harder. It's inviting you to recognize deeper truth. The spiritual journey isn't about becoming something new, but uncovering what has always been true beneath the layers of false belief. If you're beginning to feel a resonance with this deeper understanding of prayer as recognition rather than petition, write in the comments, "I am not separate from my good." Now, let's examine how this shift in consciousness transforms our understanding of the miracles Jesus performed. Now let's examine how this shift in consciousness transforms our understanding of the miracles Jesus performed. The fundamental revelation in Goldsmith's teaching was the distinction between praying to and praying from. This subtle difference creates a complete paradigm shift in your spiritual practice. When you pray to Jesus, you automatically position yourself as a supplicant, someone lacking, needing, begging for intervention from a power outside yourself. This creates a mindset of separation that actually blocks spiritual demonstration. It's like standing next to a light switch in a dark room, continuously calling out to someone else to turn on the lights for you. The breakthrough comes when you realize that what Jesus was demonstrating was how to pray from Christ consciousness. He wasn't showing off his unique connection to God. He was revealing the universal blueprint for spiritual awakening. This is why he repeatedly emphasized, "You will do greater things than these." He wasn't being poetic. He was giving practical instructions for accessing the same infinite source he accessed. This revelation leads to an even deeper insight about the meaning of I in Jesus' teachings. When Jesus made statements like, "I am the way, the truth, and the life," or "I am the resurrection and the life," he wasn't referring to his human personality or his physical form. Every time he said I, he was speaking from and as the Christ consciousness within him, and that same I exists in you. The journey of spiritual awakening involves the profound realization that there are two I's in your experience: your human personality with its history, preferences, and limitations, and the eternal divine identity beneath it. Most of us have been taught to identify exclusively with the personal self, but Jesus was continuously pointing to the universal self that is your true nature. This understanding transforms spiritual practice from theoretical to intensely practical. It's not about abstract theology or complex doctrine. It's about experiential recognition of what's already true. When you face challenges, whether physical illness, financial struggle, or relationship conflict, you're no longer approaching them from a position of weakness, hoping for rescue. You're recognizing them as temporary appearances in consciousness that have no ultimate power over your true identity. Behind the scenes of every spiritual tradition, this is the hidden truth that mystics have always known. The external world is not cause, consciousness is cause. Whatever consciousness you're holding becomes your experience. When you shift from identifying as a separate personality to recognizing yourself as Christ consciousness, having a human experience, everything transforms from the inside out. This isn't about inflating the ego or claiming special status. In fact, it's quite the opposite. It's about recognizing that the personal self isn't who you fundamentally are. The revelation that changed countless lives through Goldsmith's teaching was precisely this. Your true identity isn't something you achieve. It's what remains when you let go of everything that isn't really you. If you're feeling a resonance with this deeper understanding of the I within you, type in the comments, "I am not my limitations." Now, let's explore how this understanding transforms our perception of the cross and its spiritual significance. Now let's explore how this understanding transforms our perception of the cross and its spiritual significance. One of the most revolutionary aspects of Goldsmith's teaching was his insight about the crucifixion. For centuries, we've been taught that the cross represents God's punishment for humanity's sin, that Jesus died to appease an angry deity and save us from eternal damnation. This perspective reinforces separation consciousness and keeps us perpetually indebted to an external savior. But Goldsmith uncovered a profound revelation that completely reframes this central Christian symbol. The cross wasn't about punishment at all. It was Jesus demonstrating that even death itself has no power over Christ consciousness. This wasn't a sacrifice to satisfy divine justice. It was a powerful demonstration that your true identity can never be destroyed. Think about the mindset shift this creates. Instead of seeing yourself as a sinner whose debt had to be paid by someone else's suffering, you recognize that Jesus was revealing the indestructible nature of your true identity. He wasn't dying to save you from hell. He was conquering death to show that spirit is eternal. The resurrection wasn't a one-time miracle, but a demonstration of spiritual law, that consciousness transcends physical form. This breakthrough understanding leads directly to what Goldsmith called the practice of the presence of God. This isn't about connecting with a distant deity you petition through prayer. It's about recognizing the presence that is your very being. The divine isn't somewhere else. It's the essence of who you are, beneath the layers of conditioned thinking. The journey behind this practice involves a fundamental shift in how you approach prayer itself. When you grasp that Christ consciousness is your consciousness, prayer transforms from talking to God to listening for the still, small voice within. You're not reaching out to something external. You're tuning into what's already present. This practice creates a revolutionary impact in everyday life. When facing challenges, whether physical illness, financial struggle, or relationship conflict, you're no longer begging an external power for intervention. You're recognizing that in spiritual reality, these problems have no ultimate power. You acknowledge the appearance while resting in the awareness of what's true in consciousness. The revelation here isn't theoretical, it's intensely practical. Margaret, whom we mentioned earlier, didn't get healed of terminal illness by petitioning God more fervently. Her transformation came when she stopped listing her symptoms to God and started sitting in silence, recognizing that in spirit there is no disease. She didn't deny her pain, she simply refused to give it ultimate power. Subscribe now to continue your journey into mystical Christianity and discover more revolutionary teachings that religious institutions have kept hidden for centuries. What makes this practice so powerful is that it doesn't depend on changing external circumstances. It's about recognizing what's already true regardless of appearances. The eternal truth of your being remains unaffected by temporary human conditions. If this understanding of the cross as demonstration rather than punishment resonates with you, write in the comments, "I am eternal spirit." Now, let's discover how these principles transform when applied to real-world healing experiences. The power of Goldsmith's teaching becomes evident through the remarkable transformations experienced by his students. Margaret's story illustrates this perfectly. In 1952, she sat in Goldsmith's meditation class with what doctors had definitively labeled an incurable terminal illness. She had tried everything: traditional medical treatments, conventional prayers, confessing every sin she could remember. Yet, her condition continued to deteriorate. What happened next reveals the profound distinction between traditional religious practice and spiritual awakening. Joel looked at Margaret with deep compassion and offered guidance that shocked her. Stop praying for healing and start recognizing wholeness. This wasn't positive thinking or denial of her condition. It was an invitation to shift her consciousness from what appeared to be true to what is spiritually true. For 3 weeks, Margaret committed to this practice. Instead of listing her symptoms to God each morning, she sat in silence, recognizing that in spiritual reality, disease has no ultimate existence. She didn't deny her pain or stop medical treatment. She simply refused to give her condition power over her true identity. The transformation wasn't instantaneous, but unfolded gradually. First, the fear dissolved. Then the pain began to lessen. Within 2 months, doctors could find no trace of the disease they had declared incurable. The breakthrough insight here is that Margaret didn't get healed in the conventional sense. She recognized she had never been separate from wholeness. The body simply reflected the shift in consciousness. This wasn't a miracle that defied spiritual law. It was spiritual law in operation. Another powerful demonstration comes through Robert's journey. He had built his business empire through aggressive competition and ruthless strategy. After his initial skepticism about Goldsmith's teaching, his entire business collapsed. Partners betrayed him, investments failed, and he lost everything. This crisis became the doorway to transformation. Robert began practicing what Goldsmith called living from grace instead of struggle. Each morning for 6 months, he sat in meditation, recognizing divine abundance as the only reality. Instead of scheming to manipulate circumstances, he rested in the awareness of spiritual supply and allowed consciousness to guide his actions. The rebuilding took, in time, 2 years rather than 2 weeks, but what emerged was completely different from what had collapsed. Robert created a business based on cooperation rather than competition, on service rather than exploitation. He prospered beyond his previous success, but this time from a consciousness of abundance rather than fear. These aren't isolated cases. Goldsmith documented dozens of similar transformations over 5 decades of ministry. People with various conditions who experienced profound change. Not through external intervention, but through a fundamental shift in consciousness. If you've experienced moments when shifting your mindset completely transformed your circumstances, write in the comments. Consciousness creates experience. Now, let's explore how traditional religious practices can be transformed through this deeper understanding. Elizabeth's story powerfully illustrates this shift. After 40 years of devoted participation in traditional Christianity, attending church every Sunday, serving on committees, teaching Sunday school, she felt spiritually empty. Despite her faithful commitment, her prayers seemed to bounce off the ceiling. Jesus felt distant and unreachable, and though she loved God, she couldn't feel God's presence. Elizabeth discovered Goldsmith's teaching when she was ready to abandon spirituality altogether. What shocked her most was his statement that she'd been taught to worship Jesus instead of learning from Jesus. She'd made him so divine, so separate from human experience, that she'd completely missed his actual message. You have the same access to God that I have. For months, Elizabeth struggled with this idea. Wasn't it blasphemy to claim divine sonship? The breakthrough came during a silent meditation retreat, when she stopped reciting prayers and simply sat in the presence. For the first time in her life, she experienced what Goldsmith called the click, a moment of recognition beyond thought, where she knew, not just believed, but knew that Christ consciousness was her consciousness. The tears that streamed down her face weren't from emotional manipulation or religious fervor. They came from finally experiencing what she'd been seeking for 40 years, direct spiritual experience rather than religious doctrine. Elizabeth didn't leave her church, but her practice transformed completely. She no longer approached prayer as petitioning an external deity, but as recognizing the presence within. This revelation leads to an even more practical teaching Goldsmith offered, recognizing the nothingness of error. When facing any problem, whether illness, financial struggle, or relationship conflict, our natural response is to fight it, fix it, or pray for its removal. But Goldsmith discovered this approach actually gives the problem power by treating it as something real that needs to be overcome. Instead, he taught a revolutionary practice, recognizing that in spiritual reality, the problem doesn't exist. This isn't denial of appearance or positive thinking. It's recognition of what's true in consciousness. When you face a financial crisis, traditional religion says pray to God for money. Positive thinking says visualize abundance. Goldsmith taught something radically different. Recognize that in spirit, there is no lack, period. This mindset shift requires spiritual maturity. You're not pretending the problem isn't there. You're refusing to give it ultimate reality. You acknowledge the appearance while recognizing that appearances are temporary and consciousness is cause. The journey of transformation happens when you hold both simultaneously. The bank account shows zero, but spiritual reality knows nothing of limitation. If you've ever experienced a moment where you stopped fighting against a problem and instead found peace by changing your perspective about it, write in the comments, I've experienced the nothingness of error. Now let's address the obstacles that often arise when first practicing these spiritual principles. Here's a revelation that Goldsmith shared with his students that few spiritual teachers have the courage to acknowledge. When you first begin practicing Christ consciousness, your circumstances might actually get worse before they improve. This isn't a sign of failure, it's evidence of progress. Think about what happens when you decide to clean out an attic that's been neglected for decades. The initial phase creates more mess and chaos than when you started. Items that were hidden in corners get pulled into the open. Dust that had settled gets stirred up. Someone walking in during this process might think you're making things worse, not better. This is precisely what happens in consciousness. When you begin this spiritual journey, you're essentially cleaning house. Everything false in your life is being revealed so truth can replace it. Relationships that were maintained through pretense begin to crack. Financial situations built on fear rather than true principles become unstable. Health conditions that were suppressed rather than addressed might surface. Sarah's experience perfectly illustrates this hidden truth. She practiced Goldsmith's teaching faithfully for 3 months and watched her life seemingly fall apart. Her marriage hit crisis, her business struggled, her health declined. When she called Goldsmith in desperation, his response was unexpected. Everything false in your life is being revealed so truth can replace it. Don't abandon the practice now. Go deeper into Christ consciousness. This is the crossroads where most people quit. They interpret the upheaval as evidence that the spiritual practice isn't working, so they return to familiar patterns, begging God to fix the chaos rather than recognizing the transformation taking place. The mindset breakthrough comes when you understand that this chaos is actually progress. Consciousness is cleaning house, and everything not built on spiritual truth must crumble, so what's real can emerge. The ultimate revelation of this spiritual path is what Goldsmith called becoming a transparent consciousness. After working through the obstacles and continuing to practice presence, you eventually become so established in Christ consciousness that you become a healing presence without doing anything. People feel peace around you. Situations resolve when you enter them, not because you're special, but because consciousness operating through you recognizes only spiritual reality. Joel reached this state after decades of practice. He would simply sit in a room and be present, and people reported physical healings, emotional breakthroughs, and spiritual awakenings. He wasn't doing anything to them. His consciousness was simply so clear of personal agenda, that divine consciousness could operate unobstructed. This is what Jesus actually demonstrated. Not supernatural powers exclusive to him, but complete transparency to Christ consciousness through persistent recognition of what's already true. The journey isn't about becoming something new. It's about uncovering what you've always been beneath the layers of false belief. If you've experienced moments where your presence seemed to bring peace or healing to a situation without your conscious effort, share in the comments. I've glimpsed transparent consciousness. Now let's explore the practical methods Goldsmit taught for developing this consciousness in everyday life. The journey we've explored together through Goldsmith's profound understanding of Christ consciousness isn't just theoretical. It's an invitation to transformation. What he discovered after 50 years of practice and teaching comes down to this simple truth. Your entire spiritual journey is about recognizing what's already true. You're not becoming divine, you're recognizing divinity as your nature. As you begin to integrate these principles into your own practice, remember that the process isn't linear. You'll have moments of profound recognition, followed by periods of forgetting. The practice is returning to presence each time you realize you've left it. This is the essence of the spiritual journey, not arriving, but continuously returning to the truth of your being. If these insights have resonated with you on your spiritual path, I'd love for you to be part of our community of seekers. Subscribe to this channel for more explorations of mystical Christianity and the deeper teachings that transform consciousness. Your journey matters, and together we can uncover these hidden truths that religious institutions have often obscured. If you've made it to the end of this exploration, type "Christ consciousness is my consciousness" in the comments below. I read every comment and love connecting with those who are walking this path of spiritual awakening. And if this message has helped illuminate your understanding of Jesus' true teaching, let me know with a like. It helps others find this content who might be seeking the same truths you are. There's a video right here that explores how to practice the presence in your daily life, the practical application of everything we've discussed today. Click and continue with me over there as we deepen this journey of awakening together. Remember, you're not alone on this path. The same Christ consciousness that Jesus demonstrated is your consciousness too, not someday, but right now in this eternal moment.